It's the climate change brothers. You're my brother, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's the Climate Change Brothers, and we're here to teach you another good lesson about the climate. And this time we're going to talk about the one forgotten group that everybody doesn't think about a lot, but the farmers.
Farming has to do a lot with the weather. You know what I'm saying? The weather can make or break, a good farming year, right? Right now, we've been, across the USA, it's been a huge cold snap. But you know how everybody says when we have a really hot day, they say, "Oh, it's so hot. See, global warming's real," Mm-hmm. But when it's really, really cold day, then nobody ever says the opposite, right?
Oh, yeah.
Point number 1. Farming generates GHG gases from inputs such as diesel fuel and fertilizer.
Why are they picking on the farmers right now to reduce? What's the impetus for that? Is there some kind of thing happening with Paris climate change or the Paris Accords or something? Or what's the driving factor there?
A lot of the countries are expected to come out and, give carbon reductions. And so one of the easier sectors to target is the agriculture industry, because it's at least 20%, like we were saying in one of our last videos.
It's 20%.
It's at least 20% of all the
emissions. So, and so to get to net zero, like what the Paris Accords want people to do, right, and the countries to do, they have to at some point address the farming and agricultural industry.
Yeah, I would think so, and they use energy just as well too. So a lot of times they use diesel fuel, as we'll talk about later, to make the fertilizers that use a lot of greenhouse gases.
So they produce a lot of greenhouse gases and they consume a lot of energy, which also is a greenhouse emission in a sense as well.
Point number 2. Farmer protests around the world are taking place due to the removal of financial breaks for farms in the areas of energy, fuel, and fertilizer.
You've heard about some of these protests happening in Germany and France, the Netherlands, Sri Lanka. There's some places in Africa as well. They're feeling the pinch right now. They're getting squeezed, right? So, and they're starting to get upset and they're starting to protest. So the latest ones were kind of Germany, where all those tractors came into Berlin and stuff, and they're like, "Hey, this isn't fair." They're blocking traffic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
the highways, they're blocking the highways.
Especially the highways.
Yeah, that's what I heard they were doing, was blocking the highways.
Yeah, so if you look on the internet, they've got some great clips of it. But so what are they mad about? Well, okay. But what happened in Germany was interesting. It had to do with money and funding, because Germany had about 50 billion euros or something left over from the COVID emergency funds. And when the COVID emergency was declared over, they still wanted to use these funds to help things recover better. So they're spending this 50 billion on stuff, and all of a sudden, the Constitutional Court of Germany said, 9. Okay, you can't do that. That's against the law for what these funds are meant for. And then Germany's like, what do we do now? So they had to cut a whole bunch of places across the board. They didn't just cut from the places they gave money to, they cut from additional places. And one of those was the farming industry. So they cut some of the subsidies they had for the farmers. They cut the diesel fuel tax, which we'll talk about. That's sort of the thing where it relates to climate change. And there were other subsidies for tractors and taxes for that, and that we're getting breaks on. Well, in France, it was a similar thing, but France, they were cutting some of the subsidies for energy costs and things that were hurting the farmers, and fuel and stuff as well. So France is getting all upset about that. What does that have to do with climate change? Well, what happened was the Green parties in Germany were very happy with that. It's going, hey, that's great. We're going to cut the agricultural industry down a little bit. We're going to slash some of their diesel fuel usage and things, and so they're very happy with this decision. And so that was what appeased them. But I don't know.
And the reason part of that is too is because a lot of the nitrous oxide emissions comes from burning the diesel fuel.
Point number 3. The Netherlands had many farm protests over the reduction of nitrogen fertilizers and cattle.
But the Netherlands was yet a different one. And the Netherlands had to do with forcing all farmers to cut their usage of nitrogen-based fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, like ammonium nitrate and stuff. You have this all of a sudden these farmers going, hey, wait a minute, how do we cut? what was it? Supposed to cut by half by 2030, something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
think 50% by 2030. Yeah.
So the Netherlands, they start protesting. And Sri Lanka was very similar to that too. They were cutting their fertilizer. They wanted, and again, that related directly to climate change because of the nitrous oxide production that these fertilizers have, emit. And plus, when you talk about the cow industry, they wanted to cut, 30% of their beef industry or their cattle industry, let's just say, by 2030 as well, right? Something like that.
Yeah, and we were thinking that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the reason why they want to cut it is due to manure management. But if you just manage your manure properly, that wouldn't be a problem, and you wouldn't be getting rid of a lot of your beef industry.
Point number 4. Instead of mandating the forced reduction of fertilizer in cattle, we should have farm specialists educate the farmers on how to naturally reduce the usage through sound farming practices.
That's a good point, brother, because, okay, so they're all sitting around going, how do we cut emissions? Agricultural contributions are 20% of the human emissions. Gee, what do we do about that? Oh, let's just cut, slash, okay? The mandate that they stop these things, okay? Well, is that a good idea?
No, I don't think it's a good idea because if you mismanage it in the first place, you're still going to waste and you're still going to create a lot of emissions, And so,
Right.
and we were talking about earlier, if instead of using all this effort to just slash, the usage, they should do some funding and farm specialists go out there and help them manage the farms as far as like what they do for manure management and their fertilizer use. Because a lot of the fertilizer just is wasted anyways. That most of the world tends to over apply the nitrogen fertilizer they have on the fields, like just used half of it, and that the plants could just use
And still be effective in growing.
Yeah, and still be effective in growing.
Right.
You wouldn't have to slash, by 50%.
It would naturally go down if you helped them, and educated them and gave them incentives to do that.
I mean, here in the United States, we kind of have similar problems with it. Like a lot of the fertilizer gets washed, goes into the waterways and gets into the oceans and causes algal blooms, which causes a lot of the nitrous oxide emissions and stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's always so. It seems like people don't seem to appreciate the farming industry and the agricultural industry as much as we should, because that's an essential part of our world economy. We have to have those things, and so we just go, oh shoot, there we got to cut, boom, cut them, without a plan to back them up or in place to teach them how to replace these things. Then it's going to be very difficult to adjust. And so yeah, I think you're right. We have to, if we were in charge, whatever governments, that are helping them can say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan. Here's how you're going to, help reduce emissions. We're going to help you with farming management.
Point number 5. The practices of making anaerobic digesters, composting, and animal bedding would greatly aid in the reduction of nitrogen emissions for agriculture.
But okay, we're going to, like you're talking about anaerobic digesters more for the manure, and all these things that would help the farm industry reduce, that they probably could be easily implemented if they just knew, what or if they could have easy access to some of these things.
Yeah, one of our last videos we talked about synthetic versus natural fertilizer, and then we were talking about how California was kind of having a problem with it in the San Joaquin Valley because they have a lot of cattle there, dairy farms. And so what they ended up doing is they do a lot of composting with the manure, and they have a lot of anaerobic digesters as well. And so I don't know if they do that in Europe as much, but if they did do that a bit more, then that would reduce the the emissions from the manure. And in addition, you could do some things with the bedding, like we were talking about if you had like hemp waste or things like that, certain plant waste, you could add it
Absorbing,
add it to the manure, and it would absorb it, and then it would reduce the ammonia emissions and everything that comes from the
And those would be simple to do. They could subsidize that if they wanted to, help out the farm industry. That was something they could apply. I'm all for the agriculture industry doing their part to reduce emissions. I'm all for that. I guess what I'm not for is saying, oh, there's an emergency. Here, you guys reduce it, figure it out yourselves. We don't, and that's kind of harsh. So, and if you mess with our food sources too much, that's the problem for everybody. So we don't want to mess with that balance too much either. So, I don't like synthetic fertilizers. I don't like all that as well either. That's a lot of emissions, but I think that's going to take some time to replace as we do more and more composting and more natural fertilizers. That's a lot to expect to do, in just a few years. All right. Well, until next time, we're the Climate Change Brothers. Today we talked a lot about agricultural stuff and climate change, and we also talk about energy and engineering sometimes. And so we did that last time with the car. So now we're doing more of agricultural stuff. So anyway, we hope to tackle more and more of these complex issues. So until then, we will sign off and see you next time.